Breaking news regarding Bitcoin and when to sell your tokens, and this has to do with the darkest cloud that has ever hung over Bitcoins, and that is the Mt. Gox repayment schedule. And in case you didn't know, Mt. Gox was the world's largest Bitcoin exchange that collapsed 10 years ago. Here's a refresher.
Mt. Gox, once the world's biggest trading platform for the virtual currency Bitcoin, abruptly halted all of its transactions on Tuesday, raising concerns among users and prompting questions about the future of Bitcoin itself.
Now, when this happened, a lot of Bitcoin was lost, but some was recovered, and here we are 10 years later, waiting for some of this Bitcoin to be repaid to the customers, aka the creditors. But now there's breaking news, and the breaking news is there is a limit on when you're going to be able to claim your tokens. We finally have an end date, and the end date is kind of matching what we were looking at in the past. Now, in the past, we've been able to determine when Bitcoin is going to peak because it keeps repeating itself. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit. It's hard to see, but from the bottom of Bitcoin's price, it ended up peaking 1,068 days later. Now what happened next cycle is it ended up bottoming, and then it peaked out 1,060 days later, and then we're looking at the Bitcoin bottom right here, and we have a prediction of 1,065 days later, and this is all going to match up. Now, when you measure out the 1,065 days, you ended up in October, but what also is in October is the Mt. Gox deadline. So Mt. Gox trustee postpones the deadline to October 2025, and so it's extending it from 1 year. Now, the extended repayment period is definitely going to affect Bitcoin's price, but what is going to happen here? So the creditors who have been waiting again since 2014 now have until October 31st, 2025 to complete the necessary procedures for repayment. This is basically filling out the correct paperwork. Now, there's two reasons we had to have an extension. Number one, significant number of creditors have not yet completed the necessary steps for repayment. Secondly, the ones that are trying to fill out the correct paperwork, some have encountered technical and administrative difficulties during this process. Now, we saw that video earlier. Mt. Gox, once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, collapsed 10 years ago after losing 850,000 Bitcoin in their security breach. So we know we have repayments coming, and we know that there's a deadline in October, and we know typically the cycle should top out in October, but what kind of pullback are we going to experience? Now, we have some past selling from a large entity at a large chunk all at once, and we can kind of use this to determine what's going to happen. So Germany dumped $3 billion, and now you're seeing rumors saying Mt. Gox is going to dump 9 billion Bitcoin. Well, folks, that's kind of older news. They actually distributed a lot of the money already. About 65% of the creditors have been repaid, and yet the price continued to pump. Now, when Germany dumped their 3 billion Bitcoin, it happened around this area right here, and you can see, yeah, it ended up making a pretty large move to the downside. And not only that, it was July 4th, and so they were doing this during an American holiday, so we had a lot less liquidity, a lot of people in the Western world on vacation, not able to take advantage of the dip, and so the dip kept dipping. But if you look out a little bit further, we ended up dipping even harder about a month later. Now, the Germany selling pressure ended up making a pretty, small move to the downside, but that was easily absorbed by BlackRock and the ETFs. And when I say it's easily absorbed by ETFs here, this is the inflow. So ETFs have absorbed $60 billion in buying pressure when it comes to Bitcoin. So $3 billion in selling by the Germans is really not going to affect the price too much. And so I kind of expect also the selling from Mt. Gox to be absorbed as well. And when you see that 65% has already been paid out, meaning we only got about a third left, I'm really, really bullish for Bitcoin. But I still think if you look at the 4-year cycle and the fears of Mt. Gox, that's really going to give us an end date of October for the bull run next year. But if you want to end the note on a little bit bullishness here, now Germany dumped billions into the spot open market, but Mt. Gox technically isn't selling anything. They're distributing their coins. And so they're going to redistribute this Bitcoin to the original holders. And these people are OGs, okay? They've been in the game for over a decade, and they understood Bitcoin's value long before 95% of us did. So what is the key difference? These OGs are less likely to dump their Bitcoin like Germany did. Instead, they might cash out a little bit for lifestyle, but the majority will keep hodling. Now, the reason I want to tell you this is, I do expect it to be absorbed, but I do expect Bitcoin to top out. A lot of times, a lot of fear ends up happening when Mt. Gox is ever in the news. But to bring it back around one more time, another reason I think we're going to top out in October here, folks, is it's not just from the bottom. You can also measure from the halving. And so if we look at the halving in 2020 and we try to measure to the top right there, you can see is 550 days, give or take. And if we look at from the halving right here, well, it's not going to be much of a surprise here. 550 days is also going to be October. And you can see it right there, October 25th. So we got a lot of confluence saying October is going to be the peak. We got Mt. Gox fears. We have 1,000 days after the low. We got 550 days after the halving. And all of this is creating the perfect storm for you to be able to take some profits off the table. I am long-term bullish on Bitcoin. I do think it's going to go to $1 million a coin eventually, but we still have to respect the 4-year cycle, and we still got to respect the fear that Mt. Gox selling is going to bring to the markets, folks. So that's all I got today, Disco fam, and hopefully I'll see you and your Bitcoin bags all the way in October 25 at the top.